We're talking about the way of holiness. I've given that title to the whole book, but if you remember, I've divided the book in half. The way to holiness is up through chapter 17, and the way to holiness is atonement. There's only one way that we can live in God's presence. There's only one way that we can share His character, and that is by the radical, continuous atonement of Jesus' blood. Then, chapters 18 through 27 are the way of holiness itself. What does it mean to live out this life? And we spent 2 weeks talking about chapters 18, 19, and 20, noticing how chapter 19, which is holy ethics, is sandwiched between these two chapters on holy sexuality. And I said to you that the reason for that is that the main problem with holiness is desire. We have our desires, and we are determined to have those desires satisfied, and to a significant degree, the sexual desire is the one that drives us most deeply. So it's no accident that those two chapters are on either side of chapter 19, which deals more broadly with the whole picture. But in chapter 20 are these two verses that in so many ways capsulize what we're talking about. And I want you to notice the verb make and makes. They're used differently. What's the first one? Make yourself holy. And what's the last one? The Lord who makes you holy. And in my mind, that captures perfectly the nature and arrangement of holiness. On the one hand, you and I will never be holy until we decide, I'm going to be holy. And that involves that total surrender of ourselves, in particular our desires. I'm going to surrender my desires to you. I'm no longer going to make them Oswald's. I'm going to make them Yahweh's, and therefore they will be holy. But that's not possible unless God takes over within us and takes our offering and touches it and sanctifies it. So you shall make yourselves holy, therefore, and be holy. Why? And again, we talked about this at some length last time. The motivation for our holiness is not God's demand. It is, in fact, gratitude. I am the Lord your God. Other places in that 19th chapter and in chapter 20, I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. Yes. Yahweh, the great I am, the Lord of all being, the source of all being, the end of all being, the foundation of all being, that Yahweh has made himself our God. He's given himself to us, and he has delivered us. Why would you not want to be holy? Why would I not want to be holy? And the only reason is because we listen to the whispers of the snake. And the snake says, oh my, if you really gave yourself to God, he'd make you miserable. He'd ruin your life. And it's a lie. It's a terrible lie. I remember as a young person, when I was 13, it was okay. When I was 16, it was not okay. Because I believed that truth, that truthful lie. Thank God, I came to that place of saying, yes, Lord, you can have all of me. No better decision in my life. You shall keep my statutes and practice them. Yes, yes. Living a holy life is not just sort of a shapeless, formless thing. God says, this is the way it works. This is the way you do it. This is the way I made you. Again, if you're going to drive a car, there are certain things you got to learn. Not merely the state driving laws, but you got to learn how to do the thing. When Elizabeth was learning how to drive, we had a Ford Pinto, and it had 4 on the floor. And she still, when we come to College Avenue and the stoplight there, she still gets the shakes. She stalled that car about 15 times. You have to let the clutch off and give it the gas just at the right moment. And if you don't do it, it won't work. It's the same way in life. If you don't do it, it won't work. And again, the devil says God has all these laws that he's demanding you keep, these senseless, pointless laws. Not at all. Not at all. They're full of sense and they're full of point. This is the way we were made to live. Live this way, and life works. So that thought, I want to be sort of running through everything we say in tonight's session and then the next 2. Now, I asked the question on your study guide, if we're talking about holy ethics, what's that got to do with worship? I mean, we're talking about holy ethics. We're talking about how you live out the life of holiness. What's that got to do with worship? Because this chapter 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 are all about worship. What does worship have to do with a life of holiness? What do you say? Communication with Him. Yes. In worship, we communicate. What else?
For us, it's focus.
Okay.
Focus on.
All right. And why is that important? Why is it important that we focus on the Holy One?
It prepares us to hear from Him.
Okay. Preparation for that communication?
We're a community of believers.
Yes. Holiness is about relationship. Relationship with Him, but also each other. Behold how they love one another. We talk a lot about loving the world, and we should. But the point that Jesus makes over and over again is they're going to know who you are because of the way you love one another. And that's why the devil loves church splits. Now, there may well come a time, as I think has happened in the United Methodist Church, there may come a time when the remainder have to depart. But so many church splits are over much less significant things than the nature of the Bible, which was the source of the split in the United Methodist Church. But there it is. Holiness is about love, and love is about one another. And so, in our relationship that is focused on the worship service, that relationship is fostered. What else?
Total surrender.
Yes. Yes. In worship, we are surrendering ourselves to God. Someone has said that it's wrong to think that we are doing something for God. No, we're not. We're allowing Him to do something to us. So again, it is that refocusing. It is that understanding again of who we are and who He is. It is adoration. Now again, I've got to be very careful here because I'm an old man and I have certain preferences. But I worry when church becomes entertainment, when church becomes performance. And those of you who are using my devotional, and some of you are, and I'm grateful, will have seen a couple of them when I talk about my opposition to applause in worship. We're not applauding a beautiful performance. We're participating in a service to God. Now, I don't think I'll see the day when we stop applauding in worship. I can pray for it, but I don't think it's going to happen. But there's a fundamental understanding of what's going on there that is very, very important. Finally, our holiness, whether as a status, a thing that belongs to God, is in the state of holiness. It's His. That's a state. Or a condition. That's something about our character, about our nature. That's why Paul can talk to the Corinthians as saints. I always chuckle when I see that. These people were saints? Yeah, they're holy because they belong to God. You are called to be holy, he says. So, whichever, whether you're talking about the status or the condition, the character, it's derived. It's dependent on a relationship. One of the great, great misfortunes of holiness teaching has been that sometimes we've suggested to people that holiness is a thing you get, like the flu. No, holiness is not an it. Holiness is a relationship. It's the same with marriage. Marriage is not an it. When you start thinking of it as an it, you're in trouble. It's a relationship, an ongoing relationship. And it's in that context, then, that unless the relationship is worshipful, it's nothing. When we live in that constant awareness. You are God and there is no other. And you have given yourself in love to me. And you have allowed me to live your life in this world. What else can you be but worshipful? So I think it's no accident at all that God uses these 5 chapters to talk about how worship both pictures and supports the life of holiness. Now I ask another question there. And that is, why were priests and their behavior important to the Israelites' conception of holiness? What's the priest's function in helping to create a proper concept of holiness?
Like they kind of disciple us, we watch them.
All right. One of the functions is discipleship. What's another?
Yeah.
Okay.
An example or model or.
Yes, and this is fascinating to me, that basically the priest has 2 tasks. One is leading worship, and the other one is teaching Torah. And across the years, the priests were pretty good at this. It wasn't always proper worship, but they led worship all right. Throw a few idols in. They were good at that. This part, they generally failed at. And because they failed at this, their worship was often corrupt. I think we're always in danger of that. I try to say to students all the time, the greatest danger that can happen to you is professionalism. You will learn how to preach that gets a response. You will learn how to pray and people will say, oh, your prayers are so beautiful. You will learn how to say the right words at the right time. And all the time, your soul is dead. That's what happened to the priesthood in Israel. Not to all of them, praise God, but to far too many. They learned how to do it.
What exactly is teaching Torah?
Pardon?
What exactly is teaching Torah?
Torah.
What is
Torah is the Old Testament. It is the Hebrew word that is translated in the Greek and then into English as law. I don't like law because it's got a negative connotation now. Law is what limits us. Law is what shuts us in. I can't say it anymore. I used to say that Karen had a PT Cruiser. She doesn't anymore. We gave it to our kids. But she's got a Kia Soul. I like that. Now, none of my students can say, oh, well, it doesn't have a soul. It says it'll go 120 miles an hour. We can't find out. The law. the law that shuts us in and limits us. Torah means instructions. All the difference in the world. Again, I've used the illustration here many times, but I get to use it again. I got my first computer in 1976. It was a K-Pro. It was top of the line. It was portable. It only weighed 29 pounds. And it could do lots of things. About a tenth of what this thing can do. But at the time, wow. Well, it came with everything. The cord. It only lacked one thing. The instruction manual. But hey, I figured I'm a bright guy. I got a PhD. And eventually I found the on-off switch. They had hidden it, but I found it. Black screen with a little green square up here. I saw this key that said enter, so I hit it. The little green square flashed and it went beep. I hit it twice. Beep, beep. I hit all the keys at once. Beep, 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 beep. All the money I had paid for that thing, and it would do nothing but beep at me. Well, I shut it off. Couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand that either. I went back and turned it on again. Beep. I spent 24 of the most frustrating hours of my life. All that I'd heard that a computer could do. All the potential, all the possibility. Well, the next day the salesman showed up kind of shamefaced with his instruction manual. Well, you know what I said to him. I said, who do you think you are? It's my computer and I'll run it any way I like. You can go do bad things with your instruction manual. I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid. I almost kissed the guy. Thank you for the manual. Now, I can use this marvelous machine the way it was designed to be used. Now all the possibilities in it are open to me. Thank you for the manual. That's a very long answer to your question, Pauline, but that's what it is. It's teaching the instructions. Here's the way we're meant to live. Live this way and it works. Don't live this way and it won't work. What's so hard about that? Only one thing. It flies in the face of my selfishness. That's the problem with it. This says, give up my selfish will. And I say, why would I do that? I'll never get what I want if I do. So, Torah is law. Tragically, law has gotten a very bad press because of Protestant theology over the last 400 years that has misread Paul. Is the law capable of saving us? No, absolutely not. It can tell us how we ought to live. It can tell us what being saved would look like, but it can't save us. It doesn't have the power to deal with the perverse human will. It's going to take the Holy Spirit to do that. If you try to use the law to save yourself, it will simply damn you and laugh at you all the way to hell. In that sense, the law is a curse. But it was never intended to be a curse. And that's when Paul says in Romans 7, it's a good thing. The problem is here. So, we've taught this thing that, well, it's law or gospel. No. It's gospel in order that you may live the Torah's commandments. And we've separated them and done great damage to people. Okay, so the priests were Israel's representatives to God and I should also add, for God. They stood in God's place to offer him his food, and his food is surrendered hearts. The priests represented that to God. Here is a person who is wholly dedicated to God and giving his or her life in service to God. And so he says in 21:6, 22:2, they must be holy to their God and not profane the name of the Lord. We've talked about this before. I'll talk about it again. Name is God's character, his nature. Don't make God look bad. That's the long and the short of it. You profane God's name, you make him look bad. So here's a sample of ways to profane God's... Well, let me back up. I think the least recognized, least understood phrase in the whole Lord's Prayer is the second one. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. What in the world is that? Well, we don't know, so we just slide right past it. As a kid, I thought we were very, very sanctimonious in our little rural church, and we said, hallowed be thy name. I wondered if you did that with a pocket knife on the back of the pew in front of you. How do you hollow out God's name? What are we saying? Oh God, let the world see you as you really are. Let them see that there's none like you in power, in glory, in graciousness, in love. Oh God, let your name be hallowed in me this week. Don't let them look at Oswald and say, that's a cheap little God, isn't it? That's a worthless God, isn't it? That's a God made in his own image, isn't it? Dear God, no. So how can you do it? Well, one way is to give him less than your best. Malachi says, you profane my name when you give offerings that are cheap and sick and crooked. You're not worth my best, God. You're worth my leftovers. You're worth my trinkets. You're worth my tinsel. But you're not worth my best. You're not worth that much. You profane my name. How do we profane his name? We make it appear that his standards are always up for negotiation. Oh, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. 10 years later, well, it's wrong for some people. Here in this chapter, it says that a priest profanes God's name if he marries a woman who's not a virgin. Is marriage a sacred contract? Is it a sacred covenant? Yes. Why? Because God says so. Now, I'm not talking about ironclad enforcement that doesn't deal with situations. God deals with situations. But I'm talking about the norm. How do you profane God's name? When you make it appear that he cannot deliver you, cannot deliver you from the old habits, the old guilts, the old sins. You profane his name. How do you profane his name? When you use his power to make yourself look good. That one is so fascinating because it relates to what is, apart from Jesus, the finest man in the Scripture, Moses. They're on their way to the promised land, finally, after 40 years. And the second generation is doing the same thing their parents did. Brought us out here to kill us, didn't you, Moses? We don't have any water. Man, we were better off in Egypt. These people never were in Egypt. They don't know what Egypt is. But children learn from their parents. And Moses and Aaron start out so well. They go into the tabernacle, fall on their faces, and say, God, what are we going to do with these people? And God says, it's not a problem. There's a big rock out there. Go out there and speak to it, and water will come out. Moses comes out of the tabernacle. Hear now, you rebels. God didn't call them rebels. Must we produce water for you? God and me. Watch this. And he took the staff that had turned the Nile to blood, the staff that had filled the air of Egypt with locusts, the staff that shut off the sun, that staff. Watch this. Bang, bang, splash. And a little voice way out at the edge of the universe says, Moses, you didn't sanctify my name. You had a chance to make God look good, and you used it to make yourself look good. You profaned his name. You profane his name when you make it appear that he does not care for the outcast and the broken. This God is different. This God doesn't have any big deal with the jet set. This God doesn't much care about the billionaires. He's different. He cares about that poor drunk with the cardboard sign standing on the corner of New Circle and Nicholasville Road. Well, man, if I give him $5, he'll just drink it up. Yeah, but I've still got it and he doesn't. You profane my name when you make it appear that I'm just like all the other gods. And I like beautiful people and don't care about the rest. So the priests are supposed to sanctify God's name. They're supposed to hallow God's name. They're supposed to make God look good. And we believe in the priesthood of all believers, don't we? Oh God, look like God in my life, please. Let the world know that you are holy. Again, remember what I've said, holy by itself has no particular moral value. It just means absolutely other. And there's only one being in the universe who is absolutely other. And it's the fact that there's only one Holy One that then says you can talk about holy character. His. So, what does holiness mean? In pictures, the priests cannot have any association with dead stuff other than sacrifices. He must not make himself ceremonially unclean for any of his people who die, except for a close relative, such as mother, father, son, daughter, brother, or unmarried sister who's dependent on him. And then we go on later. Why is that? Because holiness is life. If there is one obscenity in God's language, it's death. He is pure life, teeming, multiplying, growing life. And death is a horrible thing. And I need to say something here that upsets a lot of funeral people. When the Psalm says, precious is the death of his saints, that gives the wrong connotation. What it says is, the death of God's saints costs him dearly. It's costly is the death of God's saints. He hates it. Because we were made for life. C.S. Lewis, in one of his space trilogy, goes to Mars, and there are beings there. It's not a dead planet as it is now. And these people, these beings, have never fallen. The title of the book is Out of the Silent Planet. Earth is quarantined. It's silent. The other planets, they all talk to each other, but not Earth. So, there comes a time when they are translated from this physical life to a better physical life. And it's a time of celebration. Sadness, yes, because they're losing grandpa or grandma, but celebration. So no association with death. Can't have it. No sexual misconduct of any sort. Our desires are his, to be moderated by him, to be directed by him, to be satisfied in his ways, not ours. No association with anything designated unclean. Again, we've talked about this, and we'll talk about it more. God is pure. He is one thing. He's not a mixture of good and bad. He's not a mixture of proud and humble. He's not a mixture of deceptive and true. He is one thing always, and that is to be clean. What is impure Let's get that right. Or unclean is mixed. A mixture of this and of that. A mixture of kind and cruel. A mixture of true and false. A mixture of light and darkness. That's unclean. Now, as we've said, we've got all of these object lessons. There's nothing intrinsically unclean about a pig. Now, they are not very clean, that's for sure. Although I'm told that pet pigs are as clean as you want. I've never had any particular interest in pet pigs, but that's not the point. The point is we're trying to make an object lesson. You must associate yourself with the clean all the time, and you must disassociate yourself with the unclean. Oh God, make me one thing. I guess that's Latin. Integer, one. And so the priests are just worked on all the time. Don't have anything to do with anything that could in any way be called unclean. And ultimately, Jesus is going to tell us, you know where that stuff comes from? Out of the human soul. That's where a mixture of darkness and light comes from. That's where a mixture of good and bad comes from. True and false. That's where it's got to be dealt with. And I sort of hear Jesus saying, it's taken me 2,000 years to try to get this point across to you. It doesn't seem like it's worked so far. Excuse me. Speaking about a mixture, yeah. And holiness requires physical wholeness. Now, this is hard for us. Is a person who is born with one arm less of a person than a person born with two arms? No. I think of Helen Keller. My goodness. You read some of the stuff that she wrote. She, of course, didn't write any of it. She dictated it. Profound. She couldn't talk. She couldn't hear. It goes down the list. Well, she's a wonderful person. So what's God doing here? If a person is mutilated in some way, if they're less than physically whole, again, he's trying to make a point. Holiness. And this is a cliche, but it's still a cliche that's worth repeating. Holiness is wholeness. It's to have the parts of your life put together. Everything now exists for one goal. Walk with Him. And I have to say here, I'm a little bit unhappy and many people would say a little bit heretical. I don't really like the idea that we were created for His glory. Now, don't throw me out yet. But that suggests to me that we're not valuable in ourselves. I think that's an incorrect assumption from that statement. We are valuable in ourselves, and when we live our lives to the full, we do glorify Him. But I hope you understand what I'm saying here, that we don't just exist to somehow serve Him. That's what the snake says. He didn't care about you. He just wants to use you. Well, I'm here to say He cares about you. He thinks you're somebody special. But there's, again, so I hope you see what I'm saying in all of this. The priests are intended to model and teach these spiritual realities. And it's interesting that I'm glad that the craze for tattooing came after our kids were grown. But I do think there is something about mutilation of God's body that is not a good idea. You can get rid of a nose ring. It's a little tougher to get rid of a tattoo. I've often thought maybe that's what I'll do when I retire, create a tattoo removal company. Because people are going to get tired of it. You know, where are all those body piercings that we had 20 years ago? They're all gone. Not all, but most of them, fortunately. But again, whose body is this anyhow? And what do I have a right to do with it? Excuse me. Chapter 22 talks especially about offerings. Only the priests and their immediate dependents who are clean may eat them. And once again, the explanation that is given is, if you don't obey God's instructions concerning how the sacrifices are being dealt with, you're profaning His name. You're saying, I can make it up as I go. He is not the Holy One. He is not the Creator who has a right to tell me how my life is to be lived. No, I will decide how my life is to be lived. He doesn't like it? That's tough. When you, in fact, listen to His voice, I've said this again, most of the time in your Old Testament, when you read the word obey, what the Hebrew actually said there was, listen to His voice. To me, that's quite a difference. Obey. Honey, would you? But when I say, no, I'm not going to listen to what you say, I'm going to do it my way, I profane His name. That thing of showing who God is, sanctifying His name. When I sanctify His name, I'm expressing my own sanctification. And once again, in this context, 3 times it is specified the animal must be tamim. It must be whole. Here again is this theme. What is holiness? Holiness is wholeness. I am wholly His. I am wholly one for Him. So these animals must be whole. You can't give a three-legged lamb. You can't give a lamb that's blind. You can't give a lamb that only has one ear. It's got to be all that a lamb was meant to be. And this then is where that word, that's what the Hebrew looks like. You'll need to know that when you get to heaven. Genesis 17:1. Walk before me and be tamim. Walk before me and become all you were ever meant to be. What a thought. This is why I don't like the word that's regularly used now for that word in English, blameless. Because unfortunately that suggests, yeah, you can be a sinful mess, but God looks at you through Jesus-colored glasses and he thinks you're blameless. No, that's not what we're talking about. Now again, I'll say this as long as you let me be up here.
What verse is that again?
Genesis 17:1.
Oh, 17.
Tragically, this word no longer means that. It has come to mean flawless. In 1611 English, perfect meant this. That's why some translations will want to use mature, but I think that's way too weak. A couple of other references. Psalm 18. Verse 23. This is David's testimony. It occurs both in 2 Samuel and in Psalms. Psalm 18:23. All his laws are before me. I have not sinned. I have not turned away from his decrees. I have been tamim before him and have kept myself from sin. And then down to verse 30. As for God, his way is, and this is the NIV, his way is perfect. Tamim. The Lord's word is flawless. He shields all who take refuge in him. Now go down to verse 32. It is God who arms me with strength and keeps my way secure. Tamim. Yeah, you can use perfect with God, but you can't use it with humans. Well, it's the same word. As for God, his way is whole, not divided, not unclean. It is God who arms me with strength and keeps my way whole. Tamim. Couple of other references. See, I guess I...
So in 30, it says, "Is God His way?" It's my translation says blameless, like you said. But
That's it. It's Tamim.
So I should say whole.
You might say perfect.
Oh, because this is talking about God.
But it is the same word 2 verses later talking about us. And it also appears in these other references. It appears dozens of times with regard to us. And this is, Paul is talking Old Testament in the book of Philippians. When he says, I have not attained unto this or am perfect in the sense of finished. But 4 verses later he says, everybody who is perfect ought to have the same mind I have. The versions will all say, everybody who is mature should have the same mind I have. Now, he's talking about this. Okay. So, these are the last 3 verses of 22. Keep my commands and follow them. I'm the Lord. Don't profane my holy name, for I must be acknowledged as holy by the Israelites. I am the Lord who made you holy and brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I'm the Lord. So what are all these pictures of the priest and the priesthood about? They're about this. What does it mean to be holy people? Okay. Questions? Comments?
Tell me again what obey means.
Listen to the voice of God. Thank you for listening to my froggy voice. Anything?
I'm so confused about this. Tamim
Tamim.
is plural.
No.
Um,
It is a kind of noun that says this thing has this quality. So a Sadiq is a righteous person. SDQ means right. A Hasid is a person who manifests Hesed. So this is a person who manifests, or a thing, or an animal that manifests wholeness.
So the bottom line is holiness would be
Complete.
complete in the ability to give and receive love.
Yes, I'd go farther than that. It is, you are wholly God's. You belong to Him completely.
That's why you can do that, right?
There is no limitation on your dedication or your devotion. That's what whole burnt offering is about.
Okay, because the burnt offering is sort of a praise to God,
Dedication.
dedication.
Yeah. But at the end, this is what I want to say. All you were meant to be. Holy He is. Wholly available to Him for His service. Okay?
I'm reminded of the vision that Peter had before he went to be with Cornelius.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been brought up with all these things are unclean, you can't touch them, you can't have anything with them. But then don't call unclean what I call clean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And people will say, well, there's a good example of God changing his mind. Pigs used to be dirty, now they're not. No. Now we're moving past the object lesson to what the point was for all this. So it's the same here. So that eventually God can say, the eunuch who keeps my covenant, I'll welcome into my house. And I'll write his name on the walls. But earlier on, you're saying, no, he's not whole. And only whole people can serve God in the priestly service. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Blessings.